Oh, that sounds very exciting. I feel like, I don't know, this meditation music in the beginning kind of really set the mood for me. Like, I feel like, that's what we're going to do. Well, first of all, I come to you in peace, meaning that I know that many of you might be working in very complex environments, B2B, corporate, enterprise, anything of that kind. And over the last couple of years, I have as well. And many things that I learned in those couple of years really changed the way of how I see design, how I see development, how I see the way we're working, right? But before we go there, right, before we go into that mad world, we need to understand where we're coming from. And I want to tell you a little bit of a story where it all started for me, and some of you might feel connected with that as well. So this is where it all started for me. Not playing. Oh. No, it's not playing. Okay, for some reason it just stopped playing. That was so dramatic. Oh, your hard drive is almost full. Ah, that's nice. That's nice. So if something happens during the presentation, you know why? Because I'm really terrible with things like that. So let me just delete something here, maybe. Oh my God, this is starting really well. Excellent. I can't wait for this to keep going. Right? But either way, like for me, it all started in some way, somewhere over here. Right? This is Prince of Persia. This is a game that I was playing when I was a kid, and I would spend an enormous amount of time playing that game, trying to figure out how to get from one level to the next. And then eventually, it just killed all videos. Sorry, my friends, I do have to fix it. It's very disappointing. I just have to reopen it. This is it. Ooh. It's like going to be the great presentation. Trust me. Maybe. Oh, it's saved 1 minute ago. That's not a good sign. Told you, I have a joke. Again, I have some jokes prepared. Like, for example...
Phil, while you...
Yeah, it just...
So, do you still have your presentation in one giant file with like 1,500 PowerPoint?
Oh, it's working now.
It's working now.
Yes! Oh, amazing! Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, so this is where it all started for me, and I would spend an enormous amount of time playing this, and like going all the way. So like we had like a particular amount of time. Anybody remember this? Oh, you show your age, don't you? Right? What I also remember though is this little thing. Anybody remember this? Really? No? Anybody? Now, this was the first website I ever encountered in my life. Before Google, before Yahoo, before everything. This website was born approximately 30 years ago. This website might be older than most of you sitting in this room, right? And it's still kind of cool in a way. We'd probably do many things similar today. And of course, we didn't have Flash back then, right? It was all very different. And I wanted to do this. I wanted to do this for a living. I was so excited about it. I thought, this is it. This is my life. And so I did this for a living for a short time. And of course, we should remember that this is the time where we had this. Right? Does anybody not know what this represents? So some of you might be like, what the hell is this? Now, this is how we did the internet thing back then with modems and stuff. And there were a lot of experimentations. Now, this was one of them which really surprised me. It was like a big website in 2007, 2008, right? Where it was video text, if anybody still knows what video text is, meeting the internet, if anybody knows still what the internet is, and meeting links and meeting everything combined. I was so impressed. I'm like, wow. I mean, you could actually type in numbers, but you could also click on them. That was impressive. Fast forward, well, look where we are now. Like, you do those incredible things. You can actually just walk around the website now. In a truck. Wow, that's unbelievable. And things happen, and things crash. And this is like a nice portfolio where you actually get to explore the works of an author. That's incredible. Of course, on a slightly more kind of common case, like enterprise, practical ways, this is one of the most incredible websites I've seen as well. This is a puppet theater website from Poland, from Warsaw in Poland. And it's incredible. Like, look at these puppets and it's flowing. It's like this incredible thing. It's massive, amazing, right? And of course, we went on and on and on. This is the map, interactive real-time map of Japan, which also maps weather. by looking at the data, right? If it's raining, or if it's pouring, if it's sunny or not, and then it maps on a particular area on the map. Then you can navigate it and also see traffic and see people where you see the busy areas and everything combined. Unbelievable. Like, look where we have come. So why then? Why on earth, every single day when I wake up, I get to do this? That's not fair, right? We invented all these incredibly massive, like complex, interesting, exciting environments and products and things, but every now I wake up and I have to solve a puzzle. The puzzle, my life is full of puzzles at this point. And yeah, of course, we don't get those kind of puzzles anymore. We get other puzzles. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I have a life crisis because I'm thinking, this particular point here in the intersection, technically it's a crosswalk, but I don't want to get it wrong because I don't want to, do this again. So I kind of end up, let me zoom in, and I go and zoom in. I spend an incredible amount of time just doing this, or even better, this. That's nice. Like, it's been now, 25 years of the internet thingy, or 30 years almost, right? And we still do this. Like, every time you set up a password or reset a password, it's a horror disaster, right? So why is it like that? Now, because very often when we're living in kind of environments like this, right, it's just really, really complex environment. And of course, many of you will probably be trying to kind of in some way connect to anything that's listed here. Maybe you're working on a business intelligence system. Maybe you're working on some sort of CPQ or configure price quote, right? Maybe it's kind of a B2B or CRM application. There are many of those out there. In fact, we have spent so much time talking about landing pages. But in the end, most of the world is being run and powered by anything but landing pages, right? So when I go to dentist, that's a very interesting segue. When I go to dentist, I learned to enjoy that experience. Why? Because I spent most of my time thinking and looking at the interfaces that they use, right? Now this has some beauty in it, does it? No, maybe, or maybe yes. But when you look at something like that, right? You have people who are working very specific, very complex environments. You have doctors who cannot have errors. You cannot make errors based on the interface or based on the problems that an interface has because of the way of how we built it or how we designed it. Now, of course, when you look at it, well, you have some data points. That's all you've got. When I look at this, I don't even see teeth anymore. I see data points. A lot of data points, really. A lot of ways to control the data, to manipulate data, to export data, to make sense of the data, to change the view of the data, to deal with the data, right? To me, this looks remarkably similar to this. I don't see much difference. Anybody loves filters? Has a very strong passion for filters? Maybe you have, again, also like 50, 60 filters in your application? Yeah, this is normal. For many of us, it will look horrible. Why would you do that to people? It's not like you would wake up one day and say, you know what? Today, I'm going to plug in 57 filters as drop-downs. Good luck, right? And of course, you don't have to stop there. Because you could say, well, let's just also have a pagination as a drop-down. Which you can. I mean, nothing is stopping you right here, right? So if we go and zoom in for dramatic impact, right, that's nice. Like just go through to 426 pages. Eventually, if you set up the right filters, you can get up to 1,472 pages. I counted, right? That's like the world Guinness record, I think, for filters. Or this. That's nice, right? And I think that when we look at this, again, we always feel like, oh my God, I would never do that. I'm better than this, right? I can come up with something better that doesn't look as horrible, disgusting, annoying, frustrating, disorienting, awful. Well, there is a good reason why those things exist and why they work. And the worst thing you can do is come in and say, I want to simplify this, because you should not. The worst thing you can do in enterprise world is oversimplify. And so the reason why this looks like this is because there is a patient, there is a doctor doesn't have access to keyboard, they want to walk in the room and know everything about that patient. They need to have everything at a single screen. That is the main requirement. You can't just say, let them scroll, right? You cannot just say, let them swipe, right? That doesn't work like this. They need data. And we need to be very careful about the environments about which we're talking about, right? This is a really incredibly complex, but incredibly simple as well form. If anybody speaks Japanese, right, this is one of those, I think, tax, insurance kind of forms, right? And if you wanted to make it work in English, you probably would need something like 20 or 25 steps. This is how digital forms are usually designed, but it's much more compact. And if you see, here, you have right here, right? You basically have number 19 and number 20. It's like two inputs share the same field. That's cool. We never have that in English. So there are many things like that. You can really make it very, very complex. It's very complex, but it's very compact as well. Now, my environment in which I've been working looks like this. This is a very complex environment. Of course, it doesn't look like that because it's just, a screenshot of a front page. But what you don't see, of course, is that there are 199 different websites under the umbrella of European Parliament, which I'm working on. And the goal is, and the ambition is, to bring all of them together into one, or maybe a few. And that would require, of course, a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. We need to think about different search engines, legacy code bases. We need to think about the metadata, the duplication. It all has to be available in 24 languages. It has to be fully accessible. It has to be GDPR compliant. It also has to be digitally sustainable. That's a massive and ambitious project, which is going to take quite a while. And the question is, how do you even start working on something like that? That seems almost daunting, right? Now, if you want to work on that, and if you want to work on any of the other projects, and maybe you are already, we need to understand a few things first. What I want to share with you and show you today are some things that really work well, some things that are more on a strategic level, some things that are more on a tactical level. But I think that everybody, be it developer, designer, anywhere in between, will actually get something from it, right? And before we do that, we need to understand our place. Because we need to understand the decisions that we make, be it as a designer, be it a front-end developer, it doesn't matter really. Where do they live when we actually make them? If you come in and work in this organization that deals with healthcare, deals with higher education, or anything like that, you're a very small bolt. That's not fun. It's a very small bolt in a huge organization. So when you come in and say, we're going to do it this way, nobody will trust you. For good reason. Why should they? If you ever feel like your decisions are being undermined or questions, or maybe you're not being trusted, and you don't have to raise your hand, because I feel like that a lot, right? There is a good reason for that. Because if you want to change something big, you have to be strategic about that. My first step to make it work is to look at org charts. And again, I would highly encourage you to do that as a front-end engineer, or as a designer, or as a software architect, whatever your role is, right? Whenever you start on a big project, right? As a freelancer, as a contractor, or just, full-time role, you need to understand where you are. It might be that you are a tiny little pixel, tiny little pixel somewhere over here. You need to understand who you're reporting to. You need to understand who they're reporting to. You need to understand who they're reporting to and what the relationships are. Because ultimately, if you want to make a change and make an impact, you need these people above you to carry your design, your development, your engineering decisions in action. That's important. That's absolutely critical. And that requires us to understand what business cares about. Because there are typically 5 things that businesses care about. They want to increase revenue, if it's a business, right? If it's a public service, it will be different. They want to increase revenue, they want to decrease costs, they want to increase new business, increase existing business, and increase shareholder value. Now, if in some way, strategically speaking, over time, you can show or prove that your work is fitting in one of those buckets, right? Then you can actually show the value of your work, and you can also defend your decisions, be it on the design level, on the development level, right? That's really significant, right? And I think it's really important to understand, again, our place. There was a wonderful article from Paul Adams, who is a chief product officer of Intercom, now also VP of design at Intercom. And this article really shattered my view entirely about this design development process in enterprise. Anybody working in enterprise, by the way? Enterprise, B2B, corporate? Okay, a few, right? Because very often when we think about the work we're doing, like the product, the design, the UX, the front end, right? You will often stumble upon things like this. Now, I'm coming from the UX perspective, right? But I'm actually a front-end engineer who then got into UX, right? And so very often, it doesn't matter, what role you is specifically, This is what's being propagated everywhere on LinkedIn, everywhere on Twitter, or whatever it's called, on all these other areas like Telegram, I don't know, right? UX, product design, front end is the heart of everything. The heart of everything. You cannot do anything without it. It connects technology, business, and design. We are the center of the universe. We are. Nothing can exist without us because we're the glue that connects it all, right? Which is beautiful and totally not true, right? Because this is not true. We're not the center of the universe. In fact, if anything, we're one of the small meteorites or satellites circling around leadership, right? There are many, many, many others. They might be way more important than us, and very often they are way more important than us. It is very normal that for a given designer, you might have maybe 6, 7 engineers and 20 people in sales, or 30 people in marketing. That's normal. That ratio reflects the priorities the organization has. Why? Well, because when you think about it, of course, like when you look at all these things that are circling around leadership, there is research, product management, business operations, marketing, sales, support, and so on. They are circling around leadership, but design is nothing special. Now, when we look for them, right? On the other hand, when we look at it, this is kind of a very common view of how we see this big organization in which we end up, right? Well, it doesn't matter, again, front-end or design. In marketing, they take what we built. We build it with love, right? And they just take it and make a big fuss around it and announce it. But we do the work, right? They just announce it, right? They look into sales, so that's even worse. They take what we love, what we care, what we create, and they just sell it. Horrible, horrible, horrible. How could you do that? We care about our users and they just sell it to them. They want to sell, they just want to sell, right? But they have good parties. So you might want to go and visit their parties, right? Support, well, that's another building. Difficult people, different people, boring people. We don't want to talk to them. Finance, that's okay. Finance is cool. They pay my expenses, my bills and whatnot, my salary, that's great. HR, people problems, I hope we'll never meet, right? I don't want to talk to HR. Now, why am I showing this? The best thing you can do as an engineer or as a designer, if you're working in such kind of environment, right, is to make friends in sales. That's the best recommendation I can give you. Make friends. Do you have a friend in sales, anybody? That's very rare. Very rare, because we feel like they're, sales. And we are, people. Like, we are engineers, we are designers. Now, what's interesting about it is that actually the perception of sales has changed a lot. You can do a lot in any organization of any scale if you just make friends with sales. Why? Because the nature of sales has shifted. 20 years ago, they were just selling. Just sell a product and call it a day. But now, almost everything is subscription-based. Everything is subscription-based, which means that you need to maintain a relationship with customers all the time, so they keep paying, right? So they invest heavily in kind of collaboration, communication, and really improving the experience of customers. So UX and front-end have way more in common with sales than ever before. So if you befriend them, though, usually you can actually do things like proxy testing through them and get insights about customers from them, right? And of course, again, just to make a point here, marketing and sales are usually seen as something way more important than anything that we're doing. And again, this is just the natural state of things. And again, also, right, this is a very nice quote that actually summarizes it all. Design doesn't matter anywhere near as much as most designers think. Code, in the same way, doesn't matter anywhere near as much as most developers think, but it matters way more than most executives think, right? And I just want to make a really strong point that we should be getting away from having these conversations about the process and workflow methods. That's not important. Different organizations have different ways of working. If anything, if anybody have ever heard of Double Diamond is not really real either. Because most of the time, instead of focusing on the problem and then doing your discovery and definitions and validation and exploration and delivery, we usually do it the other way around. Usually when I come in, I'm being told, we know what you need to do it. It's not like I can explore the problem space. Here's a solution, just build it. Here's the solution, just design it. And then we'll figure out what to do. We just need to launch the MVP, and then out of there we can see if there are any insights, right? It's not like you're going to spend 2 months or 3 months on research before you do anything. Usually you're just getting straight to solution to a problem that maybe doesn't even exist, right? So that's actually quite important to understand, because actually when we look at the scope, right? We can only change a few things here and there, but if you want to make a big impact, right, we need to understand our place. We also need to understand what people we need to actually carry our work in action. Right? Does it make sense, everyone? One person says, yes, that's very happy. That makes me very, very happy, right? So, moving on from here, right, I think there are some things that are really important for us to kind of look at. Because normally when we look at complex interfaces, we think about tables. This is how I feel about tables most of the time. Be it simple tables, data tables, complex tables, doesn't matter. And again, if you just think about it, how do we make tables a bit better? And does anybody think like, nice? Oh, nice, I was missing table. Like you woke up today and feel like, I missed a table. I haven't seen a table yet. I want to spend more time with tables today. This is kind of my thing, right? So there is table like that. There are, of course, plenty of different ones. And the question was, how do we design them better? Because when you start looking around a table like this, how do people operate a table? That's horror. Now, this is basically an eye tracking study of this interface of where people look, where people gaze when they move through the interface. Of course, they're operating the filters and they're operating the table at this point, but there is a lot of movement. Just a lot of movement here and forth. Now, this is just after 1 minute of interaction with that interface, right? And it's a lot of looking left and right and up and down everywhere throughout the filters. That's can be really frustrating. So we have a little cheat sheet that gives you kind of an insight about all those little things that you can think of when you're actually designing a table or building a table. You can have different cells, different content types, interaction modes. Content could be empty placeholders, could be valid or invalid. Accessories could be like an error message or input hint. And it also goes for row, it also goes for columns, and it also goes for keyboard support, and so on and so forth, right? Keyboard support is becoming very important, by the way, not only because people expect Excel-alike interaction, but also because of accessibility. Now, most of you, of course, will know that there is a web accessibility, European Accessibility Act that's coming into force by May 25. Anybody heard of it? So that's a really big deal, because now all of a sudden, not only public service websites, but also private service or kind of commercial projects need to comply with WCAG AA if they want to serve European customers and if they are considered to be essential services. Essential meaning whenever you're selling anything, this is considered to be essential, right? Whenever you are targeting or explaining something to European customers, it doesn't matter if your company is in the EU, right? It can also be outside of the EU. If whenever you're operating with European customers, you will need to be AA compliant. In my experience, most companies are scared like hell. Not only because they don't know if they're accessible at all, right? Because they know that they are not. They are not, they never have been, right? And making a table, like a really fancy, complex table that you saw before, accessible, is not easy. It is going to be quite an effort, right? And it does require a very different set of skills. But you don't want to be, getting a lawsuit, right? Or getting a penalty, a heavy penalty because of that, right? So that's quite significant. This is why, for example, things like keyboard support are often in new projects considered first before anything else. Because building accessibility early is much cheaper than building accessibility after the fact. So that's kind of a really important part of the story. Now, of course, when we look at what we, for example, need to do for tables, there are a few things. Like some of them is just to think about how do people navigate a table? How does it work? Now, most of the time, what you will find that the expectation that we have is very different from reality. Now, this is one of those tables. Okay, I told you, like there's going to be a lot of really nice screenshots today, right? So this is an insurance company, and basically what happens is it's working with people like Dave. Dave is a loss prevention consultant. And he's going to different factories and buildings and so on. His job is to identify and inspect facilities, factories, and equipment for areas with potential for accidents and property damage. And then once he does that, right, he actually goes to this wonderful, beautiful interface, and he types in data in that interface. Specifically for a given, let's say, building, here, there is some data about what that building is, where it is, and what the property value is, and so on and so forth. And then he types in all those things, like location risk quality rating. Let me just show it a little bit better. Location risk quality rating, sprinkler protection, water supply, surveillance. He basically just scores all of that. This is not everything, because there are actually, I think, 25 different factors or 25 different columns, right, that he needs to type in. And that's, of course, a quite laborious work. Now, the interesting part about it is, most of the time when it comes to tables, we never need full table. It's rare that we need full table with all 35 columns. The first thing you can do for any table, of course, is to have something like customized columns, or customize, or settings, or whatever you want to call it. So people can select and deselect columns that they don't need. But sometimes you don't even need that. Because here, in this particular case, there are two scenarios. And this is remarkably common. It could be very common in your case as well. If you do any usability testing, you'll find out, right? That people are actually looking at a table either like this or like this. Now, there might be 2 rows or 3 rows that they're looking at. There might be 2 columns or 3 columns that they're looking at. But they always look at the table in fragments, right? If you could, for example, if you have something like a stocks data, right? The best thing you can do is to maybe provide some insights, like key insights all the way on the top as cards or anything, and then not necessarily displaying the entire table. Table is great for comparison, it's great for editing, it is necessary in some particular cases when you want to see things side by side, have like a side view opening up and so on, but it's rare that you need the entire table with 37 columns. Now, the worst thing you can do is just horizontal scroll. Like, any fans of horizontal scroll in the house? That's okay, it's a safe place, right? Now, this is a really bad experience for most people. This is not only like because it's awkward and weird and confusing. The problem is that people make mistakes. Because whenever they navigate horizontally, right, there might be situations where they need to consult multiple columns that live on the other edges of that infinite stream of columns, right? So let them select what columns they need. And more importantly here, right? In this particular case, when you look at, again, at the original interface, let me just show it back here. This, right? We have properties on kind of going vertically, and then we have, well, basically input or information about each property horizontally. Now, again, this is where we're looking at a particular attribute across all buildings. This is where we're looking at the detail of one building, right? Detail view and all view. You don't need a table for that. You can allow people to navigate a table in those fragments that they're used to anyway, so they can select multiple columns and go through them, right? And of course, if they do need to dive in at some point, they can. No problem. You don't need a table on mobile for that. That's just absolutely necessary. In fact, tables on mobile perform remarkably poorly. People need an incredible amount of time to get that right. So, you don't need necessarily a table for that. In the other way, you also need to think about things that are slightly more complicated, like this, right? This is a very typical scenario where we have maybe something like a feature comparison table. You add in a couple of TVs or displays or whatever, and then people can compare them side by side. And you have a couple of attributes that are grouped, right? Sometimes you would have the button saying show differences, show similarities, things like that. Well, that kind of works on desktop, right? On mobile, difficult. So you don't need to do that on mobile. You can do something else. This is an interesting example of that. You basically add all those items for comparison. Of course, you can remove, you can add, you can, whatever. Then whenever you start comparing, it has a 2-step process. In the first process, you select what you care about. Very much like we do with tables on desktop, where you actually select what columns you're interested in. So you select what attributes are important to you, right? Once you've done that, every attribute that you have selected becomes a step in your evaluation journey, right? So as you now start comparing, you go one by one and you say, okay, 7 steps, because 7 attributes, this is the first product, this is the feature that it has. Do you like it or not? This is another product, it has another feature, do you like it or not? So you kind of vote up, vote down. You can even tap or vote up multiple times. And then once you're done with it, right? It basically gives you the insight, like, here we go, this is what you have selected. Based on your interests, based on your values, based on whatever you find important, this is the right thing for you. You don't need a table for that. That's just absolutely unnecessary in this case. In fact, there are a couple of services like that, where you can actually use something similar. Let me show you an example in the browser. You see, this is how well organized I am. There is a wonderful, oh, no, please don't die on me, right? There's a wonderful tool that's called Product Chart. Let me just zoom out here, right? So productchart.com, right? So what we get here is different way of comparing. So if you want to compare, let's say, your screen, like you want to buy a monitor or so, that's the view you get. There's no table comparison, because why would you have that? That's ridiculous. This is not, we're living in 2023, almost 24. If aliens ever came to this planet and they saw that we're just adding products as columns and then we navigate through them in a table, they'd be very confused. Why would you do that? In fact, you could do it better. So these are the filters that we can apply. So if you want like a higher resolution, here we go. Maybe you want to change the dimension of how they're going to be presented. Brightness. Okay. Or, you know what? I care about inches per dollar. That's kind of my metric. I care about that. I want to get a good price for every inch that I'm going to get. So that's my thing. Okay, here we go. And then, of course, once you select one, you think, okay, that's interesting. And I want to compare it with this one. Okay, off we go. And then you get to a detailed view. Right? That's infinitely better than a table would be. I mean, sometimes there are, of course, use cases when we need a table, but sometimes we don't. So we might be actually quite clever around it. Right? But still, again, when we look at mobile, very often we need to kind of think about how do we fix this? Because again, this is maybe not ideal when you have to scroll left and right. There are a few ways. Like if you absolutely need a table, there are a couple of ways. One of them would be to allow people to navigate in steps. Sure, they need to be able to scroll left and right, but very often they are very bad at this because they go too far, they do not go too far. So if you have a stepper at the top, right, to allow them to jump through columns, that would be better. And at the same time, you can also indicate the progress of where they currently are, right? Now, another thing, of course, is that you could have sort of cards with floating filters that people can select what they want to see, what not, right? So that's a little bit easier on the eyes, but a bit more difficult to compare at this point, right? But you also could do something a little bit different. Like if you look at a table like this, nice, right? Anybody feels this tension rising? Beautiful, right? Beautiful, beautiful table. Well, you don't need a table on mobile either, because you can also use accordions. That's the same thing, just a group of columns is then taken as a group, brought into an accordion, and placed vertically, right? So you basically get access to the entire set of data. You just present it differently because you take, instead of like 12 columns, you break them into 4 groups. Each of those groups becomes an accordion, a vertical accordion. You can open them, close them, and that's it, right? Not much more than that. That's actually working pretty well too, right? Or even here, this is a very nice example too. We have like this big, massive table with a lot of data, with a lot of columns, with a lot of statuses and everything sorting and so on, right? That's a bit different here, right? Because when we look at mobile and what it looks like this. And again, this is not just the worst thing you can do is to take a table and apply it to mobile in the same way as a table. Instead, what I always try to do is look at the data that we have there without even thinking about the table layout at all. And then I think about how do I organize that table, the data, to make sense, right? That's the same amount of information, just differently presented on mobile. That works much better. And another little trick that I can recommend to you for things like this, right? It's probably a bit difficult to see. What you can do is basically go ahead and plug in tabs. Can you see these tabs here? Plug in tabs either within the table or above the table, right? Where you can say, well, let me allow people navigate through the columns through tabs. So it could be like 4 or 5 columns, and then they click through tabs within the table, and they can navigate without having to scroll left and right. That's actually pretty remarkable too, and that works really well. So there is no harm in that at all. And very often you would end up with something like this, right? To make it work with to make it more adaptive, just removing abbreviations, maybe adding icons and things like that. That works fairly well as well. right? Now, that's, of course, just our beloved friends' tables, but there is a bit more than that. And I think one thing that I want to look at in a bit more detail, oops, sorry, it disappeared for some reason for me. That's very strange. It happens sometimes. Is how do we deal, again, in the light of, let's say, accessibility that's coming in, with things that are more on the side of inclusive design and accessibility, right? Maybe for the next, I still have 10 minutes, so maybe for the next 5. So remember, this is my environment, and in my environment, I got this task. So these were the constraints, and one of them was not only fully accessible, but also we got to the point where we thought we should be universally inclusive and accessible. And it's very difficult to understand what it actually represents and means, right? Of course, ADHD, mental health issues, older adults, colorblindness, all those things had to be considered. And of course, if you think about them late in the process, that is where it really costs money. Now, the first thing that you need to know is that people are really bad at many things, but most importantly, when it comes to their emotions, they're horrible. Now, if you do any kind of testing with people, what they do, think, feel, and say are often very different things, right? You cannot trust people when they actually say that they believe that this is like that they feel that or that in usability testing. In general, of course, it's a different story, right? And we never should ask people what their emotions, or what they think, or what they feel, but rather we need to track their emotions, right? Why am I talking about this? Well, because when we do testing, we need to be very careful about how we run that testing, and also how to, like, the insights that we get from it. So one point I want to make here is around colorblindness. I think we kind of got to this point where we think like, okay, we got that. We have this WCAG, AA compliance, color contrast, we get that, we understand that. But there are many things that are going way beyond that. And accessibility is not just about checklists, like compliance. There are a lot of people, like 300 million people who have some kind of color weakness, as it's called, or color blindness, right? And in general, it's a bad idea to rely on the color alone. Now, here's an example. Again, I don't know about you, because some of you might have color weakness, some of you might have color blindness. You will perceive colors differently, depending again on basically whether you're color weak or color blind, right? So many people would actually see this little vibrant blob in here on the left. But these colors will be perceived very differently, although we always refer to them as the same green or the same red, depending on whether you're color weak or color blind. Now that's, again, for color weakness, it's a little bit, it's just different, right? There are still differences very clear between, let's say, green and red. But this is the case for color-blinded people, right? Where you actually realize that actually it's very difficult, very, very difficult to see the difference between the green and red. And if you happen to be colorblind, you will see exactly we will know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is quite significant, right? So this is what people with normal vision would see. But this is what 1% of men with red blindness would see. This is what 1% of men with green blindness will see, right? And again, this is not a small portion. It's 1% of men affected by that. So if you just rely on green and red, good luck, right? Because it would be impossible to recognize anything in traffic light, right? And again, this doesn't go just for red and green, right? So they often, to some people, look like gray, both of them. So if you say, just click on the green button, that would not be clear what you mean, right? That also affects purple and blue. That's something that many people don't speak about. So the worst thing you can do actually is to combine purple, red, and blue. That creates a lot of chaos, right? That's really, really bad. So when I started doing the research on that, I was very surprised. Because, for example, there are many combinations that we often use without even thinking about it, which are, compliant in terms of accessibility contrast, but they are really, really trouble. For example, never mix red, green, and brown together. That never goes well. Never mix pink, turquoise, and gray together. That doesn't go well. Never mix purple and blue. Never mix green and pink if you use red and blue. And don't mix green with orange, red or blue of the same lightness. So this is very specific, right? But then if you, say, have a brand and you have a particular color palette, you might want to keep that in mind as you're designing it. The other thing that's really surprising to me, is how to deal with designing complex applications for older adults. Now, very often when we think about older adults, what do we think of? I don't know. People who are slow, right? Don't even know how to use a machine properly, right? These are really, really these horrible stereotypes that we tend to have, which are not true, right? Because most of them are often healthy, because again, don't forget, we're living in 2023, so there has been 20 years of us, or 30 years, I would say, of kind of culture of eating healthy, being healthy, things like that. So often healthy, active, and with a very solid capital that they desperately want to send and to spend on your application, but if your application is not accessible for them, then good luck, there is no chance, right? And they're often ignored. Like, oh, we're designing for cool people between like 30 and 40. Now, the cool people often don't have the money, right, to pay what we want them to pay. There is 1 billion people aged 60, or not 60%, it's aged 60 plus, right? That's quite significant. And they have no problems with digital. Not at all, right? In fact, if you think about it, this is just a quick thing I put together here, so no examples and stuff. But most of them are healthy. There are significant differences in how they use the web in different groups. There is no just elderly people. 60 to 65 is very different from 65 to 70, and it's also, again, very different from 70 to 75. But as you grow older, the shades of blue and purple, right, and yellow and green are becoming more difficult to distinguish, right? And what's really interesting about older adults, by the way, is that they often read and analyze every word. They're very careful. Like if we usually follow the F pattern when we're reading content, like a little bit of bold here, a little bit of text here, we just scan. That's not quite what older adults do. They actually often read everything from top to bottom, which is called the Stroop effect in neuroscience, right? Or psychology. But of course, as you grow older, it becomes a bit more difficult to do precise movements. So if you have things like drag and drop and resize, it becomes more difficult. And by the way, again, looking at European Accessibility Act and looking at the WCAG 2.2 accessibility guidelines, you cannot just have drag and drop and rely on mouse anymore. You always need to have a separate UI control to allow people to move columns, to drag things around, and so on. Otherwise, it's not accessible, right? And that, of course, goes for European Union, EU Accessibility Act as well, right? So you need to provide people with a way to actually control and resize and reshuffle things without having to use a mouse. So keep that in mind, right? And of course, very often this is really interesting because when you look at usability testing, they often view error messages as a personal failure. Now, why is it important? Well, it's important because if you have an interface that is maybe not resilient enough and they encounter errors, they're the first and the quickest to abandon your UI, right? So if they make a lot of mistakes or you have really poor generic error messages, right, you will end up in a situation where they will be abandoning too quickly. So you'll have a very high abandonment rate right there. So this is quite important to keep in mind as well. And then just a few things, I know that I have like 2 minutes or so, which are really important. I think we just totally underestimate some things that we sometimes take for granted or sometimes don't know of. Dyscalculia being a big deal, right? Dyscalculia is the persistent lifelong difficulty in understanding numbers. You might say, well, what? I've never heard of that. What is dyscalculia? Well, 3 to 10% of people, there is no data because it's relatively new, discovered recently, right? Many people don't know what that represents or what it even means. Now, dyscalculia is basically a problem that you encounter when it comes to numbers. For example, if you ever encounter a situation where you find it difficult to remember a phone number, or read a timetable, or a chart, anybody had this feeling like 12 a.m., 12 p.m. Is it, hold on, what was that? Is it like a midday or is it kind of midnight? If you ever had this problem, this is kind of a sign, right? Charts, not only because charts are poorly designed, but just because they have numbers that are close to each other. Or for example, this is often a problem here. Some people have no problem here, but some people do, right? Whenever you're typing, let's say, a big number, like a credit card number, and you have like 14 characters or whatever, 14 digits, right? Some people have real problem doing that without spaces, if you don't have any spaces. That's a real issue. And again, you might think, why are we talking about accessibility, we're talking about designing for complex UIs. This is remarkably difficult to get right. We never think about it. We never have discussions about that. We have discussions about double diamond. This is really difficult if you want to get something for people to really not make mistakes, right? And get through the interface quickly. That's really, really difficult to get it right. And they also have a lot of issues with managing money, right? So low numbers, again, it's not just like 5 people in the world. We're talking about 3 to 10% of people who have that. So if you're working on a fintech application, right? Oh, you need to know that. That is important because they will make mistakes, sometimes irreversible mistakes that they cannot, fix because of the way of how the interface is designed or built. So you will be losing money in that particular segment of users, right? That's quite important. The same thing goes here. This is a good example. I really have an issue with that. For example, if you read something like this on a website, you might find it weird and very confusing. Some people do, some people do not, right? So this is much better. Can you see the difference? Maybe not. Maybe you do, right? If you do, then it's kind of a sign that maybe there's something in there, right? And then the same story over here. Like, whenever I see 6.5 hours, I'm like, hold on for a second. What was that? All right, it's 6:30, not 6:50, right? Things like that make a difference, right? And then finally, the last thing I want to focus on, just really highlight over here, is that we, again, don't really speak about this. There is nearly 1% of the population who is autistic. And we often think about it as being like a temporary thing. It's not a temporary thing. And it's not a sickness either. It's just a different way of experiencing the world. And what's important to understand here is that autistic children always grow into autistic adults. It's not like it's changing. Like with age, it doesn't happen this way. And they also have serious issues with things like high luminance, high contrast, and parallax. So if you feel like parallax is cool, sure, it is, but you're abandoning some of the audiences right there. As a bare minimum, we need to provide an option to not have parallax, so kind of reduce motion experience, right? So anything like a sense of urgency that, of course, we do in all the websites out there, right? They will have these people abandoning, right? So if you're working on a healthcare application, you will need to know all of this by heart, right? And you will need to know, kind of run testing with people to understand why you should do this thing and why you shouldn't do the other, right? Most importantly, 40% of autistic people have an anxiety disorder, right? They take things very literally, so if you explain things in a fancy, bloomy way, like error messages, right? You need to rewrite altogether because it wouldn't be understood, right? So many things like that are totally, really, really interesting and really, really challenging to kind of get right. One final thing I want to final thing to mention here is dyslexia as well, right? Because many people say that there are different kinds of dyslexia. There is not different kind of dyslexia, there is dyslexia. People just happen to be on a different side of the spectrum in dyslexia. It's really a condition when people have issues writing and typing, right? And again, we just don't have data about how many people are affected by that. But what we do know, of course, at this point, is that there is a lot of confusion about what we should do. Now, these cases on the top are a little bit strange because this is really rare. Usually when you will find articles about dyslexia, you will find things like this. Reading takes longer. B, P, and D are often mixed with, often mixed. People can experience difficulties reading it, right? And U and M and W are the same story. That's not true. Most of the time, it's not the case at all. In fact, dyslexic people are the gold mine for any organization because they're the best people to spot patterns and find and identify some kind of interesting or unusual solutions. So that works really well. But there are things that are very much needed. For example, when you look at, dark gray instead of black and soft colors instead of white, that does make a big difference. Aligning text to the left instead of the center does make a difference. And this is where, of course, things like autocomplete are necessary. Again, if you're working in education, right, you will need to know this, right, because you need to design the experience around that. Now, these are just a few things I wanted to show at this point. I actually wanted to show way more, and I have way more slides than that. But as we are wrapping up, right, it's been, it's kind of a wrong title. It's been kind of a challenge for me to kind of really make sense of all of that. I had no idea about any of this up until a couple of years ago. And of course, we could go way more into forms and tables and stuff like that. I did put together a lot of stuff like that in my video course that I put together. So if you want to follow along and you want this and way more about complex tables, complex forms, accordions, carousels, and whatnot, this is a friendly discount that you can use. Bagel, because bagels are cool. Smart interface design patterns, you can actually find it over there, right? But in general, my life has been really miserable for the last couple of years, right? COVID and everything, stress and stuff. So I learned to let go every now and again. You can never make it perfect, but we can try. So something that I showed today, well, we can never make things perfect, but at least we should try. So I want to finish off with a very short story of my life in 1 minute. This is my life every single day. So disappointing. That's for designers. Well, sometimes things don't go as expected, I would say, right? So thanks to Parallel Studio for the video. Beyond that, there are cats and more cats and meow, and thank you so much for being here and listening, and I hope there were some useful insights for you.